My name is Sharon Constancon. I'm Chief Executive of the Genius Group and spend my life in other people's boardrooms. And I'm now going to tell you some stories as a result of that work. I also lecture for the Charter Governance Institute on boardroom dynamics. And we cover the theoretical side of some of the things we're going to talk about in a little bit more practical way. Now, can I just confirm, thumbs up, that you can see my slides? Brilliant. Thank you. Nothing worse than somebody saying to you, oh, by the way, what are you talking about? But anyway, we're not in that space, so thanks very much. Right. What I'm going to cover in decision making is really the way we as humans are biased. We are influenced, and it's understanding that and learning how to mitigate that would make a far better boardroom decision making environment. That's all I'm going to cover in that space. So looking at some of the tricks of the trade, one of the things is to look at what are the things that we go through in the process of making a decision. So one of the models that exists, it's quite a simple one. It's very logical. We ask questions. We acquire the knowledge that we've asked for. We appraise the information we've been given, think about it. We aggregate all the information that is coming to us from different places. We apply that knowledge to the situation. We make a decision, and then we assess, so what now as a result of the decision we took. A very logical process. So I wanted just to share this one with you before we get into the complexity that we deal with in terms of bias. If we don't like a fact, if we do like it, if it correlates to our view, we agree with it immediately. Absolutely, that's right. We're moving forward on that one. The other situation that we have is when we don't like the answer, we don't correlate to that answer, we unfalsify it and we find reasons why it is not right. So that gives us a completely different dynamic to the way we are thinking about something. Bias in the boardroom, as we say, it's bound to happen because we have a collection of human beings who are at the pyramid of the experience they have in life. And at that pyramid of that experience, they bring with them the biases of the various ones we're going to talk about. So as a result, we have anything up to 7, 8 people, all with their different biases, pulling in different directions. And unless we've got groupthink bias, we're actually going to end up pulling in different directions. And the problem you have is this whole bias factor and not handling, bringing decision-making to the table in an effective manner. The risk we have is that our independent directors are not of the value they need to be or could be for the organization. I just want to stop for a second, Stuart, and just make sure that we've got nobody in the room that I can't see. Just making sure that there aren't other people who are not getting in.
You're still host from what I can see.
Oh, so right. Okay. There's, yeah. As I speak of it, somebody has just come through. Okay. Stuart, I'm just going to make you host quickly. There you go. All right, you can help me now. Yep. Thank you very much. Yep. One of the statements that has been made is that as human beings, we're not clever enough to work out that we are doing silly things, and that regulation should be there to counteract the human instinct of making biased decisions. And this was a statement made 10, 15 years ago by an academic. And interestingly enough, our latest version of the UK Corporate Governance Code and the guidelines does bring into account that people must mitigate bias in any decision-making or in any risk environment. So it actually has reached our regulations and our guidelines. Kind of biases that exist, I'm showing you 18 of them. I'm just going to talk about a few of them. Groupthink is probably one of the most dangerous ones we have because people think it's easier just to agree than to actually take the risk of being the one to walk the plank and say, I disagree, which at the time of a decision can be probably a career limiting event in that boardroom that you are working in, which is not the point. The point is to stop them and make them think again. Now, if any of us are old enough to remember the movie 12 Angry Men, it's one of those classics we all know, where the conversation was beyond reasonable doubt and managed to turn the entire jury, that was 11-1, to 12 agreeing that they could not give guilty without within reasonable doubt. So you can get somebody who just says, guys, stop, let's just think. Can we think this one through? This is my view, and the whole conversation starts again. And that is a very valuable thing to do. But as a director, don't do it every time, because people won't enjoy you for it. And also bring these conversations up as early in the conversation as you can possibly do. The other one is availability. Somebody's available, they can be put into the job, and a common one, which I see happening very often, CEO resigns, finance director says, I'm great for the job, puts their hand up, and they say, that's nice and easy. Putting a finance person into a CEO job, the reason is they're a finance person, the other person was a CEO. So often we see finance people limiting their future career by stepping out of the role they're good at. So you see an excellent FD become an awful CEO. Worked with one recently where literally the individual cannot cope with it and has these red mist moments of throwing temper tantrums, which he never did as an FD. Never, ever, ever did. He was quite a stable individual. But he suddenly ended up with the responsibilities of decision-making and leadership that you're not trained for in an FD role. And he's not coping with it. So, coach, process to try and help that solve the problem. Loss aversion. Sometimes if the numbers come up with a loss, that loss is cheaper than what it's going to be if we make the wrong decision. And we are so ingrained not to take the decision that equals a loss. So we must think about that. Sometimes that loss is the cheapest loss, and the others are going to be a lot more expensive. So always think about, am I looking at a negative number and making the wrong decision because it's a negative number? Another one I wanted to cover, which is probably the most important one, metacognitive bias, is we believe we don't have any bias, and we do. So let's just accept it. I talked about this very briefly in our session last week as well. There's another number of biases I'd like us just to look at. And the one at the bottom, there's blind spot bias, where we actually don't know what we don't know, don't want to know what we don't know, have never been given the opportunity to. Our training, our focus on life, the way where we come from, doesn't naturally show that up. So blind spots can be both a function of availability, but it also be a function of our mental state of blocking it out as well. We always take the most positive, and the other one is personal survivorship. So you will find people will make a decision that is the best for them, not what is best for the organization. The other thing is to have a framework, to be able to be in a boardroom environment and be the one to ask the difficult questions, to be the one to say, are we sure we're doing the right thing? Same as we did in the movie. Ask yourself, ask the recommender, and ask about the proposal. So all the content that we are going to look at will be checking for the biases. So I'm only going to mention one or two in each of these 12 questions, but you've got them to go back to. Looking for the fallen in love with the answer. In other words, I've seen 3 or 4 opportunities. This one's the best one. I've fallen in love with that one. And I've almost negated the fact the other business opportunities, investments, or strategies are available to me. And I've ended up focusing all on one space. So it's blinding yourself to the other things and saying, this is the one I want. I'm now focused in this one area. So I just wanted to identify that one. We've talked about the other 2 already indirectly. We need to ask the recommender. Now, obviously, you're going to ask the recommender about the actual project itself, which we're going to talk about next. But it's trying to assess to what extent the recommender is being influenced by biases as well. Can we try and negate the biases in that person that we need to now identify? So the one that I was looking at here was are the facts and the figures correct if you were given a clean sheet of paper? In other words, let's not talk about the history. Let's not talk about whence that person is coming. If we had a clean sheet of paper, would we be given the same facts and figures? And I think that's quite a difficult one to answer, but would put somebody in a position that they'd have to give you some English explanations that gave you assurance that they knew what the truth was behind the numbers that they've given. And if somebody starts to fail on this question, I would start digging deeper into other areas, particularly in the next session about the product itself. So a lot of it will be the ones that we've talked about already, so I don't want to go through them again. But also people's previous successes in life are the ones that will frame their existing view on something going forward. So when you're talking to the proposer as well, or recommender, please be sure that you don't just say, oh, because they've done it before, therefore it's going to work. And we often make that mistake. We all do that regularly. When you're actually looking at the project itself, now there you have to do your proper due diligence as a board director to make sure that they do actually know the facts and the figures of this case, or whatever it is, and also making sure that they are being realistic. They've done the required stress testing. So have they done the right stress testing? Have they looked at the right parameters? Have they got the delta you need? And have they actually assessed this loss aversion? Have they accurately determined the risk? Have they accurately said what's going to go wrong? I have a financial services background and I work in derivatives a lot. And the question is, how will this derivative play out during its life? And it's making sure that you've accurately determined how things will behave under various given market conditions, not just high road, low road. That's not sufficient. We need more than that. There's another guide you can look to. The Financial Reporting Council here in the UK has got these 15 key steps to stop people being biased. So if you look at the ones in blue, these are the ones that are quite key. Some of the others are key for certain purposes. But the key one I want to just address is give the board enough time. If you're asking for instant decisions, the risk of bias becomes so much higher. If you've given them the facts, you've socialized it with the board, you've kept them along the journey as an executive, and you said, this is how we're going to get there, you've far better chance of getting to the right answer. Another key one is to break the project up into stage decisions. The stage one might be, can we address this project? Get a yes on that. Then can we look at the financials? Can we look at stage one? There are various ways of breaking it down because some people's minds are not going to accept the whole project and it will get in their way of making the right decision. Whereas if you break it up, you will get there. The other point is they talk about circuit breakers, but like putting a fire break on Table Mountain. Make sure you get time to stop, reflect, and have a look at where we're going. Don't just mindfully continue on the purpose that we're going on. And pretty obvious for anybody who's been in meetings, ensure that you have actually got the correct minuted items that you need to. In the process of making a decision, understand the personalities around you. Know how you're going to react to the content. Know how other people are going to react. You know, certain Neds will always see red mist on a certain topic. Others will always say yes to everything. Others will always agree with the CEO. Others will always ask plenty questions. How is your environment going to react to what's going on? And if you're the proposer, how are you going to work with that so that you influence your own outcome by understanding what's around you? So don't go into the lion's cave and not have a clue what's going on in that space that you need to understand what you want to get as an achievement. De Bono, if any of us are old enough to remember De Bono, he was the late 90s. This was very much the sort of in thing of diversity of cognitive thinking. We talk about diversity all the time. Diversity is critical in a boardroom environment. What is critical here is ensure you've got enough of these 6 thinking hats in your boardroom so that when you need the correct things to be done, that you've got the right thinking process that'll come in and kick in. So if you've got the people who are instinctive and gut reaction, do you have the counter to that where they will be the cautious person, the black versus the red? You've got your creative person and your factual person. If any group of groupthink or builds up in your boardroom environment where you don't have all 6 of these or as many of them as possible, that you will end up with a, sorry, just hold on a second. So what is important is that we use those different people in different ways to support you getting to the right outcome for the organization. Creativity is always a difficult one when you're coming to decisions. So many people will be on the risk mitigation, risk aversion side of decisions, rather than being in the positive side, which is around what is right for this business. Now, if you don't take some risks in organizations and take some riskier decisions, you're never ever going to grow. So how do you get that balance within the organization? So then I went to go and look for what research has been done around bad decisions being the outcome. And one of the comments was lazy. So yes, human beings are lazy. They'll take the easy route out. Now, we've had that from a bias perspective, but here we can see a number of lazy outcomes from the way that they are approaching the situation. And 2 I want to make reference to is indecisiveness. If you have indecisiveness on a board and you're not getting clarity of decision making, the problem you've got for the chairman is being able to chair that indecisiveness and try and bring it to a decision. The net result is it'll get kicked down the road, kick the can down the road to the next meeting, and so we'll go through the same topic again. So being indecisive in a decision-making environment just costs time and money. An example I had was a chairman that didn't make a decision on a certain individual. It cost them 2 years and a reputational risk that blew up in their face. Had they addressed this issue, instead of kicking the can down the road, they would have been in a much better position. But it was a too difficult decision rather than the explosive one that became the reality. The other one is failure to communicate. If people don't communicate with each other, within the board, within their own views on things, it will go wrong. The types of things that sit on the too difficult list usually involve people. Person's tenure on the board, person's personality, how they might feel. They hierarchical, more senior than me, so therefore I can't challenge them. And there are all sorts of reasons why we just don't do what we know is right. If we were given a piece of paper and said what would be the right thing to do in an exam question, and we come into reality and we do all the wrong things. And it's understanding, how do we stop ourselves doing the wrong things because it's just too awkward, and in the end the outcome is actually worse. So what is important is to have some form of a framework that you can use to help bring everything back together again when you feel, as a chairman or as the proposer of a document or as a non-executive director, that things are not working. This is something that you can use as a framework to just get the circuit breaker working and get the conversation going back again as to where the right place is. And we've understood some risks. We've addressed diversity of thinking, and what we've learned from this few minutes, just over 15 minutes, is how easy it is to get decision making wrong. And as a chairman, the important part is to be able to identify that these things are going wrong and what you can do about it. Now, I've covered a lot of material in a very, very short period of time, which is the whole purpose of these conversations. I think now it would be valuable for people to ask some questions around either what I've said or some personal experiences they'd like some comment on, or once again, if you have a circumstance you'd like to ask a question about, I'll think on the back feet and I'll see if I can give you an answer. Open to the floor. Who would like to put their hand up first? Just do a physical hand. Alan, great. I think every director goes there with the intention of doing the best they possibly can. The outcome of what we call team dynamics results in invariably not that. The sum of everyone's best intention is not the outcome. And that's because we are human beings and we don't know how to work together in teams, and we don't know how to be constructively challenging without being personal or judgmental or sounding like we're on our pillar box and that we are the most important person, leaving our own agendas behind. We struggle to do all of those things. So it's our communication skills that tend to fail us in that process. Seldom is it about the ability to understand the content, which can be the case. So it's very important in a boardroom environment to get decisions to work well, is that diversity of IQ and EQ. So if we have enough knowledge in the room and enough ability to communicate in the room, we should start getting a better outcome than some of the boards we come across these days. Good leadership and good chairmanship definitely brings that lot to a better position as well. So yes, we'll be looking at leadership as another subject going forward, and boardroom dynamics we looked at a little bit, team dynamics a little bit last time, but we'll probably pick it up in more detail in the new year. There's a comment from one of you, from Keir, saying that former CEO as a director or potentially as a chairman. The problem you've got here is you're actually countering the corporate governance code, which is known as best practice, when you put a CEO in as the chairman. Chairman should be, in terms of our code, independent at appointment. We accept that all chairmen are no longer independent post-appointment because of the role they take. I would be very, very reluctant in my personal position to take a CEO role from the CEO who is now the chairman, because they are going to become very instructive and directive in telling me what to do, and I won't be able to take the business where my creativity de bono hat wants to take it, because the framework of the previous leader is going to completely smother the new leader. So you have to accept change if you're going to put a new person in the role, and you have to give them the space to fly. Otherwise, they're not going to last long. Thank you, Daniel. What you are addressing is something that's quite an important aspect around boardroom governance, is the factor called influence, and let's say undue influence. So if we talk about having conversations which are a learning experience for the directors that are happening offline between meetings, and all are getting fair, equal content and insight, very valuable. It's when it becomes unfair in terms of the content, because the chairman or CEO is going to influence this one that way and that one that way to get what they want. So they're playing that game of knowing the opponent and getting the opponent on side and doing it with undue influence, which is one of your major risks that occurs with that. The other aspect is that the positive aspect is you're keeping everybody on the journey with you as the project is evolving. Once again, taking mindfulness of what I've just mentioned before. But the biggest risk is where somebody is inadvertently bullied into the decision that is wanted. An example was a FTSE 250 not that long ago that I was working with, and the chairman took one of the directors out for dinner. It wasn't necessary, but it wasn't wrong. But by the end of the conversation, the comment was, "You're bullying me and you're using an environment to bully me. I'm not giving you your answer," which is very strong for a director to do, because the risk is, you're not playing my game. I'm going to shorten your life on this board. In the end, fortunately, the right thing happened. The chairman's no longer there. So things happened it was one of those circumstances where I saw a whole bunch of risks in this evaluation and warned them. And the company secretary said, "You can't tell the chairman that'll be the end of the world." I said, "If you don't, it's going to be the end of the world anyway." He didn't tell the chairman the end of the world did happen. So, these things do they do come to pass, and they do, when they blow up, get worse. I think what headhunters and boards don't do is look at the dynamics within the environment. How are people working together? How are we making decisions? What's right and what's wrong with those decisions? And how would this new person coming in fix it or fail it because it's actually working well? So are we putting this group think together problem? Are we putting such a diversity together that we're never going to get an outcome, not going to work? Are we going to choose somebody who is not going to contest too much, which is going to make it a little easier to get through meetings? Not right. And what you're talking about there is that 0.5, the easy option, the availability option, because it sounds like it technically cannot go wrong because the person knows the company. What you haven't taken into account, there's 2 human beings involved. 2 human beings are not going to sit in that same space together. And it's not understanding the human side of what looks right on facts and figures. And facts and figures cannot be what drives us going forward. I think the shakeup that COVID is going to bring to a lot of boardrooms is going to show over the next year. I think many boards have coped just because they've coped. It's been so violently different that people have muddled their way through it in a way that you can't hold them to account in the way you could hold people to account when things go through at a normal pace. I think what's going to come through now is the risks that have been created as a result of the way people have had to behave over the last year. I think you'll see a dramatic turnaround, a change around in both CEOs and chairmen naturally, not so much FDs, but you will through the creative people in a business as well. If they are not stepping up, I think you'll see change in that space as well. So I think there will be a major place for the transformation agent, digital as well as culture, as well as people, dealing with how boards are going to have to adapt to, you can't do it that way, but doing it this way, half-baked, is equally not good enough. So I would support you. I wouldn't actually say it's going to be everybody, because that would be the headhunters more than a silver lining onto their dark cloud. It does, some aspects of looking at the stained glass window in front of me with all these colors of people that aren't angels, aren't God, aren't disciples, they are human beings that I'm having a meeting with. It does create a very different dynamic in the way that we are engaging with one another. And some aspects make it better, and many aspects make it worse. But what we haven't seen is what we can't see yet. It's the unknown emerging risks that are going to come out of this in terms of the way we have to behave as a collective, the way we're going to hold things to account, the way we're going to report things. And digital itself is going to be a risk in itself, but also the IT, cyber, information, people making decisions, falling outside of culture, culture breaking down. Those collective things will start to show their cracks, and business, I think, is in for a lot of help being needed to become collective, contributing teams of people again, whether it's the boardroom, whether it's the executive, the legal team, or this department. I think unless we start getting back into human contact and spending time with one another, we are going to see certain things break down. It's one thing if you're a virtual organization right from the beginning, but to go from being 100, 200 people in a team to not seeing a soul other than this way, it is going to, people are not going to be delivering off their best performance at all.
Okay.
We were talking about, Susan was making a comment saying that we need to have input from more than one place in decision making, and it's not the ivory tower making the decision, it's not the chairman's decision, it's not the CEO's decision. We need input from everyone, and that's the board, but equally we should be soliciting information from a wider spectrum. How many times have I heard management say, but we knew it was the wrong decision, but CEO wanted it and the board approved it. And the management is saying it's the wrong thing. They know. Go and find your information for yourself. Go and do your own assessments. Understand how other people are thinking, because what you're being told is what they want you to know. Go and find out for yourself. It's quite important. The other question, what is the role the company secretary can play in decision making? Huge, big time. I call that the fulcrum of the seesaw. So you've got the seesaw going this way and you've got the COSEC in the middle. The other role for the COSEC is the glue that brings all the comments together. It's also the person who can help the papers be presented in a way that they become receptible to, that's a terrible Americanism, receptive to the audience that they are being presented to. It's also the COSEC who can say this one's never going to fly, or actually you are showing bias. This is the bias that you have evidencing. Let me help you get rid of it. Other people in the room are going to have A, B, and C bias. Let's work with that. So the company secretary is extremely valuable in the process of decision making, and equally just to help the chairman understand the dynamics of the decision-making process and how they are and are not working. Because often in the process of chairing a meeting, you're missing a lot of the body language, the eye contact, the things, the nuances of what's going on around the room can easily be lost to a chairman who's in the process of preparing for the next stage or to sum up or making notes or whatever might be happening. Chairing efficiently and observing efficiently don't necessarily correlate easily unless you're trained to do it. So it is important to do it. Virtual meetings could also have an impact on challenges. Yes, this is taken from an insurance perspective. It can also bring the insurance risk, not only the business risk, it brings the liability, directors and insurance liability risk into a contention, depending on how things have been done. It's also brought to mind all the issues we have with how decisions are made. Have we had the quorums present? Have we had correct input from everyone? That whole decision-making process we've seen with regulators. One regulator I've witnessed with a company, somebody had to fly from the Far East, way east, to London, because that particular board's regulator would not allow one person, at least or two or three, in a Zoom or Teams meeting environment to make certain decisions. That person had to, in the heat of COVID, fly here. Now, if it had been a closed border country, I don't know what would have happened. Now, in this particular case, she was able to fly in, but then had to quarantine for weeks and weeks and weeks and not be able to get back, because then it would have had to quarantine the other way around, and is now only going back to her home country now, having had to be here for almost 3 months as a result of that one decision. So it does have, the regulators have an influence as well. Any other questions? We are over time. Anybody wants to drop off, I totally respect, but if there are questions, happy to continue. Complex area. I think if anything you take away from today is watch people's body language, think about what they might be influenced by, take your A-team biases and see where they might be playing out. And you might come up with a very different view on what is the right answer. But please, 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 your own biases first, because you have them. Understand them. What are the things that influence you in making big decisions? Because that's what we're all having to make all the time. In a week's time, we have another conversation. So please look out on LinkedIn, and then we'll be picking up again 3rd week of January with these sessions.